What does it mean to be free? Not political freedom, not the freedom to travel, to choose between this or that job, this or that belief. I am speaking of psychological freedom, the freedom within, the freedom from fear, from conditioning, from the endless movement of becoming something. Most of us live imprisoned by our own thoughts. We live within the narrow walls of memory, desire, and belief, and we decorate these walls with ideals and hopes, thinking that they are windows. But they are not windows. They are bars. And strangely, we are both the prisoners and the jailers. We build the prison of the self, brick by brick, and then we seek someone to set us free, a teacher, a book, a method. But no one can free you from yourself. Freedom cannot be given. It must arise naturally, effortlessly, when the mind sees the truth of its own bondage. To see clearly is to be free, but we rarely see. We look through the screen of thought, through the haze of our own past. When someone insults you, for example, it is not the person you respond to, but the image you have of yourself that reacts. To know oneself is to observe oneself in relationship, to see how one reacts, how one speaks, how one looks at a friend, a stranger, a tree, a cloud. It is to watch without naming, without comparing. It is to see the movement of thought as it arises, the movement of fear, jealousy, ambition. When you watch it silently without trying to shape it, you begin to understand its nature. And in that understanding, there is freedom. The observer is the observed. Have you ever seen this fact directly? When you look at your anger, you are not separate from it. The observer, the I, is the product of thought, and anger is also the product of thought. So the observer and the observed are one and the same movement. When this is seen clearly, conflict ends. Because conflict exists only when there is division. When there is no division, there is silence, and in that silence, a new intelligence comes into being, not the intelligence of the mind, but of awareness itself. A man once said to me, "Sir, I have a family, responsibilities, bills to pay. How can I ever be free?" And I said to him, "You mistake freedom for escape." To be free does not mean to abandon life. It means to live life fully, without the weight of the past, without fear of the future. Freedom is not isolation. It is participation without attachment. It is love without possession. It is action without motive. But to live that way, the mind must be very quiet, not forced into silence, not disciplined into stillness, but quiet, because it understands. You cannot force the mind to be silent, just as you cannot force a flower to bloom. The flower opens when the conditions are right, when the soil is fertile, the sun gentle, the air pure. In the same way, the mind becomes silent when there is understanding of itself. When you see clearly the futility of effort, of becoming, the mind naturally stops its restless movement. That stillness is not the end of thought. Let us look more deeply into this question of self-knowledge, because without understanding oneself, there can be no freedom, no love, no clarity. To know oneself is not a matter of time. You cannot say, "I will gradually come to understand myself." The self is not something static that you can study at leisure like a book. It is a living thing, changing from moment to moment. To understand something alive, you must watch it in motion, without trying to capture it, without trying to define it. Definition is death. The moment you define what you are, you cease to observe. You have already imprisoned yourself in a word, in an image. And the tragedy is that most of us live inside these definitions. I am a success. I am a failure. I am spiritual. I am nothing. We live by labels, and those labels become our prisons. Self-knowledge begins when you stop defining and start observing. It is not about adding more knowledge to what you already have. It is about seeing the structure of the mind as it operates in daily life. When you are angry, do you observe the anger, or do you immediately justify or condemn it? If you say, I must not be angry, you have already moved away from the fact. You have created a division between what is and what should be, and that division is conflict. To observe anger without the observer, without the word anger, without judgment, that is pure attention. And in that attention, the thing observed undergoes a radical transformation. You do not have to do anything. You simply see, and the very seeing ends the illusion. But to see like that, the mind must be still, not forced, not disciplined into stillness, but quiet because it understands. Understanding is silence. Silence is understanding. When you look at the sunset or at a bird flying across the sky, there is a moment when you are completely attentive, isn't there? In that moment there is no thought, no observer, only observation. That is real meditation. Not the repetition of words, not sitting cross-legged for hours, but that spontaneous awareness in which the self is not. Have you noticed how thought always interferes? It says, that was a beautiful sunset, I wish I could feel that again. The moment thought enters, the beauty is gone. Because thought is the past, and the past can never touch the living moment. So long as thought dominates perception, you cannot see what is true. And this is why self-knowledge is not a matter of accumulating ideas. It is the art of seeing without the interference of the past. Now, what is this thing we call the self? Look at it closely. It is nothing but a bundle of memories, desires, experiences, fears, and hopes. It is a movement of thought projecting itself in time. The self is the past acting in the present and imagining the future. It is a shadow pretending to be real. When you say, I want to be free, it is the shadow that wants to be free from its own shadow. Can you see the absurdity of that? The very structure that creates the problem tries to solve it, and thus the problem continues endlessly. Only when you see the whole mechanism, see it, not intellectually but actually, does the movement stop. Then there is a silence which is not created by the mind. A silence that is not the opposite of noise. It is a silence that has never been touched by time. In that silence, there is no me and you. There is only awareness, vast, limitless, beyond thought. But our minds are never silent because we are constantly measuring, comparing, judging. We say, I am not as intelligent as he is, or I am more spiritual than she is. This comparison breeds envy, pride, conflict. And where there is comparison, there can be no peace. The desire to become something, to become enlightened, to become a better person, is the essence of conflict. Becoming is the continuation of the self. And the self, as we have said, is the root of bondage. Can you live without becoming anything? Without the need to be more, to achieve, to arrive? If you can, then there is tremendous beauty. Because in that stillness of non-becoming, there is creative energy, an energy untouched by ambition or fear. We think creativity belongs to the artist, the poet, the musician. But creativity is not the privilege of the few. It is the natural expression of a mind that is free, a mind that is no longer burdened by what should be, that simply acts out of clarity, out of love. This is not an ideal. It is a fact that you can discover for yourself if you watch the movement of thought. Watch how thought creates the image of me, then worships that image, defends it, suffers for it. If you watch carefully without choice, you will see that the image is empty. It has no substance. It is made of memory and fear. When you see that deeply, not as an idea but as a living truth, the whole structure of the self collapses. And in that collapse, there is immense freedom. A freedom that is not from something, but the freedom of being nothing. To be nothing is not despair, it is beauty, because only when you are nothing can you love everything. Only then is there compassion. Only then do you act rightly, without motive, without calculation. A mind that is something, that wants to become something, cannot love. It can only trade in emotions, attachments, and dependency. But a mind that is nothing, empty, silent, open, is filled with love that has no object, no center. It is like the fragrance of a flower that gives itself freely to the air. And that love is intelligence. They are not two different things. When there is love, there is intelligence. When there is intelligence, there is order. Not the order of discipline, but the order of understanding. So you see, the understanding of oneself is not an end in itself. It is the beginning of transformation. As you watch yourself, in your thoughts, your words, your gestures, without judgment, without resistance, the old patterns fall away. You no longer live from memory. You no longer react mechanically to life. You respond freshly, wholly, with clarity. And that clarity is the very essence of freedom. Freedom is not the result of effort. It is not something that can be given or practiced. It is the perfume that arises when the mind no longer clings to its own image. The self is time. When the self ends, time ends. And where there is no time, there is no fear, no sorrow, no becoming. There is only life, vast and timeless. Do not ask how to reach it. There is no path. The truth is a pathless land. You cannot approach it through belief, through tradition, or through authority. You can only meet it when the mind is completely still, not made still by discipline, but still because it has seen the futility of its own movement. So, can you see yourself, your thoughts, your emotions, your ambitions, as you would watch the movement of clouds across the sky, without clinging, without interpreting, without saying, this is good or that is bad? Just watch. In that watching there is understanding, and understanding is freedom. Let us go even further, because to stop halfway is to remain in illusion. Freedom and self-knowledge are not ideas to be admired. They are the very essence of living. So let us inquire quietly, without motive. What does it mean to observe oneself? When you observe, who is the observer? Is he different from what he observes? We have assumed that the observer is separate, that there is me watching my thoughts, me controlling my emotions. But is that true? Look carefully, and you will see that the observer is the observed. When you are angry, the you who says, I must control my anger, is itself born from anger. The observer is part of the very movement he tries to change. So any attempt to control, to discipline, to suppress, only strengthens what already is. The mind that tries to transform itself is merely chasing its own shadow. But when you see that the observer and the observed are one, conflict ends instantly. In that moment there is a silence so profound that it is not of your making. That silence is truth. You see, the mind lives in fragments, one part judging another, one thought opposing another. That fragmentation is disorder, and we try to create order through control, through effort, through moral systems. But all such order is artificial, born from fear. True order arises only when there is no conflict at all, when the mind sees itself as a whole movement, not divided into good and bad, right and wrong. To observe the whole movement of life, the trees, the people, the noise of the city, the quiet of the night, without separation, without naming, that is meditation. Meditation is not something you do for 20 minutes a day. It is the perfume of awareness that flows through all moments. It begins when the mind observes its own restlessness, without trying to still it. It begins when you watch a thought arise and end, just as you would watch a wave break and return to the sea. In that watching, you will discover something extraordinary. The mind becomes still by itself. The very seeing of its restlessness brings quiet, and that quietness is not dull. It is full of energy, full of light. It is like the sky after a storm, vast, clear, alive. But the human mind is frightened of that vastness. It wants to be occupied. Have you noticed this? We fill every moment with activity, reading, talking, scrolling, planning, remembering. We are terrified of being alone with ourselves, because when there is silence, the self begins to fade, and the self, not wanting to die, keeps busy. The more restless we become, the more we seek distractions, spiritual or worldly, it makes no difference. We chase enlightenment just as others chase wealth or pleasure, but all chasing is the same movement of desire, wearing different masks. Desire is never satisfied. It promises fulfillment, but breeds only sorrow. The object changes, but the hunger remains. And we call that hunger life. Can you look at desire itself without naming it, without calling it good or bad? Just watch it, like you would watch a flame dancing in the dark. See how it arises from sensation, from the memory of pleasure, and how thought sustains it by saying, "I want more." That very observation brings a quiet understanding. Then, desire no longer dominates you, it loses its grip. Freedom is not the suppression of desire. That would only lead to conflict and hypocrisy. Freedom is seeing desire as it is, and in that seeing, desire finds its right place. It no longer controls your life. Now we must also look at fear, because where there is fear, there is no love, no clarity. Fear distorts every perception. We fear so many things, losing our job, our partner, our youth, our image. But if you observe carefully, all fear is the same movement, the movement of thought projecting the unknown into the future. Fear is time. It is thought saying, what will happen tomorrow? What if I'm hurt again? What if I fail? Fear lives in imagination. It is never in the actual moment. Right now, as you listen, there is no fear, only the thought of fear. Can you see this truth directly? That fear is a shadow created by thought, and thought itself is limited. When you see that without argument, without analysis, the whole structure of fear collapses. It ends, not slowly, not gradually, but instantly, because you have seen the fact, and the fact is truth. To look at fear completely, you must give your whole attention to it, not partial attention, not saying, I will look, but also hope it goes away. No, you must look as if your life depended on it, because in a sense, it does. Fear dulls the mind, cripples the heart. To end it is to begin to live, and when fear ends, love begins. Not the love that is born of need, not the love that clings and suffers, but a love that is vast, free, unpossessive, that love has no opposite. It is not the opposite of hate, because opposites are born from each other. Love that has no opposite is beyond thought. You cannot invite love. You can only remove what obstructs it. You cannot cultivate it. You can only see what poisons it. Fear, jealousy, comparison, dependence. When those are gone, love is. It comes as naturally as light fills the morning sky when the clouds have cleared. Love is not personal. It is not my love or your love. It is not something you feel only for a few. It is like a spring that flows endlessly when the rock of the self is lifted. And that love is the essence of intelligence. Not the intelligence of calculation or logic, but the intelligence of compassion. An intelligence that acts rightly because it sees clearly. When the mind is quiet and the heart free from fear, there is a sense of vastness. Not something mystical, not a vision or an experience to be recorded, but a state of being without center or boundary. In that state, there is no you and me, no observer and observed. There is only the movement of life, infinite, sacred, beyond the reach of thought, and to live from that silence is the greatest revolution. It is not the revolution of ideology, of reform, of violence. It is the revolution that begins in the heart of each one of us, when the old dies naturally without effort and something timeless is born. When the mind is free, there is love. When there is love, there is order. When there is order, there is peace. Not the peace of resignation, but the peace that comes from understanding the whole movement of existence. That is psychological freedom. That is self-knowledge. Let us end this inquiry where it must end, in silence, not in conclusion, because truth is not something that can be concluded. The moment you conclude, you have already lost the living essence of it. A conclusion is born of memory, and memory is of the past. But understanding happens only in the present, in the immediacy of seeing. So as we come to the end of this dialogue, do not gather what has been said as knowledge. Knowledge is useful in the field of technique, but in the field of life, it becomes a burden. To be free is to be free even of what you have learned here. Otherwise, you are merely replacing one prison with another. Life is movement, endless, unpredictable, subtle. When you cling to an idea, to a belief, to an image of yourself, you resist that movement. And where there is resistance, there is conflict, there is decay. Life then becomes a constant battle between what is and what should be. The should be is an illusion created by thought. Thought projects an ideal of peace, of love, of perfection, and then struggles endlessly to reach it. But the reaching never ends, because the ideal is only a shadow of what already exists. To see what is, without the distortion of ideals, is the beginning of intelligence. To see your anger without wanting to change it. To see your loneliness without escaping it. To see your confusion without trying to become clear. That very seeing brings clarity. The seeing itself is the transformation. When you truly see, not through the filter of words or memory, but directly, the mind becomes still. Not forced into stillness, not disciplined into silence, but naturally quiet, like a lake without wind. And in that stillness, something sacred begins to move. Do not name it. The moment you name it, it becomes part of the known, and the known is always small. That which is sacred cannot be contained in the mind, nor approached through rituals, prayers, or philosophies. It is there when the mind and heart are utterly empty, empty of ambition, of comparison, of seeking. That emptiness is not barren. It is full of life, full of beauty, full of compassion. When you are empty of yourself, you are full of the world. You look at the tree, the river, the sky, and there is no separation. There is only perception, pure, unbroken. In that perception, the observer is gone. There is only the act of seeing, and that seeing is love. You know, love is perhaps the most misunderstood thing. We think love is attachment, passion, romance, or dependence. But love has nothing to do with possession. The moment you possess another, love dies. Love is not about holding, it is about allowing. It is not about demanding, it is about giving, and giving without asking, without expecting, without remembering. Love has no past and no future. It exists only now. It is in the smile of a stranger, in the quiet of the morning, in the act of seeing a bird in flight. You cannot cultivate it through discipline or prayer. You cannot find it through meditation techniques or teachers. You can only remove the barriers that prevent it: fear, jealousy, the image of me. When those barriers drop away, love appears, uninvited, spontaneous, immeasurable. And that love is not yours or mine. It is not personal. It is like the light of the sun. It shines on all without preference. Perhaps this is the greatest beauty of life. When you no longer seek to become something, you begin to live fully. To live without becoming is to be in communion with everything. Then work is not a struggle. Relationship is not a conflict. Meditation is not a practice. All these things flow naturally from understanding. Understanding is not an end point. It is a constant flowering. Each moment reveals something new when the mind is free from the old. The more you see, the more silent you become, not because you are suppressing thought, but because you see the futility of noise. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of immense attention. And in that attention, the whole of life is mirrored. Your joys, your fears, your ambitions, your loneliness, everything. And when you see that totality without division, you are free. Freedom is not a destination. It is not something you will find tomorrow. It is now or never. It is in the act of seeing without the seer, in the act of listening without the listener, in the act of being without the becoming. So, my friends, do not make of this a philosophy, a new system, or a set of beliefs. Truth cannot be organized. The moment it is, it dies. It becomes a word, a symbol, a memory, and the living flame is gone. Each one of you must see this flame directly for yourself. You cannot depend on another, not on a teacher, not on a guru, not on a book, not even on me. Dependence breeds authority, and where there is authority, there is fear, and where there is fear, there is no freedom. You must walk alone, but not in isolation. Alone in the sense of wholeness, not loneliness. When the mind is free of comparison, it is alone. And that aloneness is the beginning of innocence. Innocence is not naivety. It is clarity untouched by corruption. It is the capacity to see anew each moment without the dust of the past. Only such a mind can see the immeasurable. And so we return to the beginning, to the question of freedom, of self-knowledge, of living without conflict. When you understand yourself, not through analysis, not through effort, but through choiceless awareness, everything falls into place. You no longer ask, "What should I do?" because action springs from intelligence. And intelligence is love in action. When there is love, you will do what is right effortlessly. When there is love, there is compassion. When there is compassion, there is no cruelty, no division, no violence. And from that compassion flows an entirely new way of living, simple, peaceful, and profoundly creative. So let this understanding take root, not in thought, but in being. Let it breathe in you, without effort, without will. Do not chase enlightenment. Do not become spiritual in the traditional sense. Just be deeply aware of your thoughts, your words, your relationships, your actions. Awareness is the seed of transformation. And from that seed grows a life of extraordinary beauty, a life without fear, without confusion, without the burden of becoming. Then perhaps you will know what it means to live in truth, to live in silence, to live in love. That is the ending of sorrow. That is the flowering of freedom. Long pause, then softly, "Thank you for listening."